friends, Krista here. Thanks for stopping by Books and Jams. Today we're going to talk about the last part of August and all the books that I read at the end of August. I did do a mid-month wrap-up where I talked about the first 8 books that I read in the month, and I have 6 more to talk about here with you today. Real quickly though, in case you missed it, the 8 books that I read in the beginning of the month were The Alice Network, 5 stars, Grump, The Fairly True Tale of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs by Liesl Shurtleff, also 5 stars. Blue Ridge Sunrise by Denise Hunter, 3 stars. Louise Penny, A Trick of the Light, either 4 or 5, I can't remember. So good. The Jane Austen Society by Natalie Jenner, I gave that one 4 stars. Interpreter of Maladies by Jhumpa Lahiri, 3 or 4, I can't remember. The Peach Keeper by Sarah Addison Allen, I think 4 or 5. Loved, loved, loved. And Ask Again Yes by Mary Beth Keane, and I gave this one 4, but it probably was closer to a 3 in regards to my level of enjoyment. So those ones I already talked about. I will link the video down below in case you missed it. You can hear a little bit more of my thoughts. But I did read 6 more books this month. Fantastic. August was a really, really good reading month. In that video, I was in the middle of a couple. I had been reading The Lavender Garden by Lucinda Riley. Lucinda Riley is an author that I have been wanting to read for so long, and I finally did it. Yay! In The Lavender Garden, we follow this young woman named Emily whose family passes away and leaves her their home in France, and she, throughout the story, learns about some events that happened in her home and some people that used to live in her home during World War II. There is a bit of a romance in here, lots of war history in here, and this young woman kind of coming into her own and figuring out who she is. She was feeling rather lost, and she has to figure out what she's going to do with herself. And she changes a lot throughout the story, which is really lovely. I really liked this. After the first couple chapters, it took a little bit for me to get into it, but once I was in it, I flew through the rest of it and I couldn't get enough. I really enjoyed this story. There were some really difficult parts, as is to be expected when you're reading a war novel. It definitely piqued my interest in reading more from Lucinda Riley. I know many of you have talked about the Seven Sisters series. I'm not going to start that right now, but I do have 2 or 3 other standalones of hers on my shelves that I plan to get to before diving into another series. After some of those heavy books at the beginning of the month, including The Lavender Garden, I picked up The Penderwicks in Spring, which is by Jean Birdsall. This is the 4th book in the Penderwick series, and I loved it. At first, when I learned that the main Penderwick sibling in this book is Batty, who was the youngest in the other books, and didn't really play much of a part in the adventures and such because she was kind of young and slightly annoying to the older sisters, some of them in particular, I wasn't that thrilled about, oh great, this is going to be a baddie story. I'm not going to like it at all. But I ended up really loving this. I laughed, I cried, it was very tender. Batty deals with some pretty difficult situations in here and takes on some pretty heavy stuff for a little kid, and just sees herself as being at fault for some situations, in particular their mother's death, which we learn about in the first book. She feels like she is in part responsible for that, and that's really heavy for a kid to deal with. So it deals with some pretty heavy stuff, and I always love it when children's books, well, when any book really, deals with the topic of grief, and this one pulled at my heartstrings, and I loved it. And I just have one more Penderwick book to go before completing or catching up. I don't know if it's a complete series at 5, but I have one more to go, and I'm really excited. I love this series. The main audiobook that I listened to this month was Dragonfly Amber. This was kind of a random thing. I had put it on my holds list through the Libby app with my library, and just wasn't sure when it was going to come in. It had said like 6 weeks or something, and I even like pushed it off once because I wasn't ready to read it, but last month I just decided it was time to dive into this chunker. So I did. And this is the 2nd book in the Outlander series. I read the first book like 2 years ago, maybe. The beginning of 2019. So a year and a half a little more than a year and a half ago. So it's been quite a while before diving into this one. In Outlander, we follow Claire, who kind of finds this portal and goes back to the 1400s. Now I have it wrong. 1400s, I'm sure. Jacobite Rebellion in England. And in the first book, we follow Claire's travel in time and where she goes back to Scotland in the 1400s, and it's her story of that. And this continues Claire's journey. She had come back through the stones, which was like the portal, and was in England. So at the beginning of this, she's in England. She had gone to America. Like, it just continues her story, but it kind of tells a little bit more of the story of Claire and what happened to her. I don't want to say adventures, but on the other side of the stones. And in this one, she has a daughter, and so she's trying to explain all of this to her daughter, who doesn't exactly believe her. There were parts where I kind of zoned out a little bit, and the more historical, the whole fight for the English throne and Bonnie Prince Charlie and the Jacobite Rebellion and all of these aspects of history that I'm not particularly familiar with. I'm a little more familiar with now, but some of that kind of lost me while listening to it. But that's mostly on me, not necessarily. I thought the narration was great. I thought the story still was very good, and I am still planning to continue with this series. Who knows when? Hopefully not 2 years from now, but I am glad that I moved along in that series. Another one that I partly read and partly listened to was Silver Sparrow by Tayari Jones. This is my second book by her. This one is a little bit more YA. Both of the female protagonists that we follow are young teenage girls who one of them knows that her father is a bigamist. That's the first sentence of the book. My father, James Witherspoon, is a bigamist. So the one girl is kind of like the other family. It's her and her mother, and she constantly has to give way to his original family, or his real family, per se. So in the whole first half of the book, we follow Dana Lynn, who's the secret daughter. In the second half of the book, we follow Charisse, who is not the secret daughter, and we just kind of see life in some of these events, and it doesn't go back and tell the same story. We continue on, which I appreciated. I'm glad it wasn't the same events from two different perspectives. It just kind of showed what life was like with a bigamist father from two totally different points of view. I think Tayari Jones does a really good job of making her characters and situations feel very realistic, even if you don't particularly like some of the characters or agree with their choices. I felt the same way about American Marriage. I felt very frustrated by the end of that book, just in the way that some certain situations were handled, and I felt very similarly in this one. The ending was not satisfying. It wasn't wrapped up in a nice pretty bow where every character kind of either gets what they deserves or has a happy ending. That's just not the case, and that's reality. So I feel like it's very real. Her writing is fantastic. Fantastic writing without being particularly beautiful. It's pretty straightforward, but I love the way that she writes her characters and situations, even though I don't always understand the decisions that get made. But yeah, I'm glad that I read this one. I thought it was so well done. So well done. I read another one of my classics this month, which is fantastic, Far From the Madding Crowd by Thomas Hardy. I had been wanting to read this for a while. I think it was Doris from Aldi Books quite a while ago read this and raved about it, and it's been on my radar since then. I really didn't know anything about this. I did read Tess of the D'Urbervilles by Hardy when I was much younger, and I remember that I didn't really care for it at all. So I was a little hesitant going into this one, and I did read this with a couple subscribers, which was a lot of fun being able to discuss with Jillian and Natalie. I hope you're still reading it. I haven't heard from you in a little bit, but it was fun to discuss with Jillian our thoughts along the way. This is the story of Gabriel Oak, mainly. He's a shepherd, and Bathsheba Everdeen, who is a young woman that Gabriel falls in love with early on in the book and proposes marriage, and she turns him down. They continue to be in each other's lives. Their fortunes change throughout the book, and it's lovely. I was not expecting there to be any humor in this, but I found Thomas Hardy to be pretty funny at times. Just some of the descriptions that he would use. Some of the characters were just straight ridiculous, which was a lot of fun. This ends up being almost like a love square. Bathsheba has a tendency to make men fall in love with her very quickly and become almost obsessed with her. So we have Gabriel Oak the shepherd. We have an older farmer. Bathsheba ends up inheriting a farm from her uncle, determines to take care of the farm on her own. And a nearby farmer, Boldwood, is one of these men that just falls in love with Bathsheba very quickly. And then we have a soldier, Soldier Troy, who is also part of the mix along the way. I found it pretty easy to read when I was reading it, but I didn't always want to pick it up. And at first, I started the audio early on in the book and it wasn't working for me, so I continued to read in print. But then I had a little bit of a drive one day and I tried the audio again, and at that point I was so invested in what was going on that it was much easier for me. I ended up finishing like the second half or last third of it by audio, which was a lot of fun to mix it up that way. And then I did end up borrowing the movie from the library and I watched the movie, which was also very lovely. I'm really glad that I read this one. And this was one of my classics that I wanted to read this year. So now I have read 2 of the 5 classics that were on my list, Gone with the Wind and Far from the Madding Crowd. So 3 to go before the end of the year. I doubt I'll get all 3 of them, but hopefully at least one more. Victober's coming up, so that should help. And the final book that I knocked out right at the very end of the month was another library hold that came in for Tweet Cute by Emma Lord. This is a YA contemporary. So much fun. This definitely has You've Got Mail vibes because we have this young girl and boy who end up getting into this Twitter war with each other. And of course there's some romance in there. The boy's family owns a bakery. The girl is the daughter of this like burger franchise that's just blowing up, and their 2 establishments, those 2 establishments get into a Twitter war, and these 2 kids are kind of like the spearhead of that on Twitter. It's just a lot of fun. I really enjoyed this. I flew through it, and there's not much else to say about it. It's probably not going to be one that stays with me forever, but I really appreciated what it was. I appreciated the fun of it. I appreciated the story of these 2 families and these 2 kids trying to like bust out of what's expected of them from their families. And I liked their personalities. I liked the banter between the 2 of them. I liked the Twitter war, even though I'm not a Twitter person at all. But yeah, I definitely thought that this was a lot of fun, and it was a perfect way to end my reading in the month of August. So here are the 6 books that I read at the end of August. I would love to hear your thoughts on any of these. Did you agree with what I thought? Did you add any of these to your TBR? What are some of the books that you read in August that you just loved? I would love to hear about that. And that is it for me today. I would love for you to give this video a big thumbs up if you liked it. Subscribe if you haven't already. There are lots of ways to connect with me down in the description box below and support my channel. And I will be talking to you in another video very soon. Bye.